The winter of 1885 brought the worst blizzard anyone in Colorado Territory could remember. Snow fell thick and heavy for 3 straight days, turning the world into a white nightmare. Roads disappeared under massive drifts, and the temperature dropped so low that even seasoned mountain men stayed close to their fires. Sarah Mitchell had been traveling with her family's wagon train when the storm hit. They were heading west to claim land near Denver, full of hope for a new life. Her father, Thomas, was a determined man who believed hard work could overcome any obstacle. Her mother, Elizabeth, carried their baby son while trying to keep their 2 younger daughters warm under thin blankets. When the first snowflakes began falling, Thomas urged the oxen forward, hoping to reach the next settlement before the weather turned deadly. But the storm came faster and fiercer than anyone expected. Within hours, the wind was howling like a wild animal, and snow was falling so hard they couldn't see the wagon in front of them. The wagon train stopped near a grove of pine trees, seeking shelter from the worst of the wind. Families huddled together, sharing food and warmth while waiting for the storm to pass. But by the 2nd day, their supplies were running dangerously low. The oxen were weak and cold, and several people were showing signs of frostbite. On the 3rd morning, disaster struck the Mitchell family. Their youngest daughter, 4-year-old Mary, developed a high fever and began shaking uncontrollably. Elizabeth held her close, tears freezing on her cheeks as she watched her child suffer. The family's medicine had run out the day before, and without help, Mary might not survive. Thomas made a desperate decision. He would take Sarah with him to search for help, while Elizabeth stayed with the other children. At 15, Sarah was strong and could help him navigate through the deep snow. They would head south toward the mountains, hoping to find a mining camp or a trading post. Father and daughter set out into the white wilderness, their boots crunching through snow that reached their knees. The cold bit through their coats like sharp teeth, and the wind made every step a struggle. They walked for hours, following what Thomas hoped was still a trail beneath all the snow. As the day wore on, Thomas began to stumble more often. His face was turning blue and his words came out slurred and slow. Sarah realized her father was suffering from the cold more than he was letting on. She tried to support him, but at 15 she wasn't strong enough to carry a grown man through deep snow. By evening, they had found nothing but empty wilderness. No smoke from chimneys, no lights from windows, no signs of human life anywhere. Thomas collapsed against a large boulder, his breathing shallow and his eyes glazed. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of love and desperation. "You have to go back," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Find the wagon train. Tell your mother I tried." Sarah knelt beside him, her own body shaking from cold and fear. She knew her father was dying, but she couldn't accept it. She couldn't leave him alone in this frozen wasteland. But Thomas pushed her away with the last of his strength. "Go now before it's too late. Your family needs you." Sarah stood up on trembling legs, tears streaming down her face as she looked one last time at her father. Then she turned and began the long walk back through the snow. The journey back became a nightmare of cold and exhaustion. Sarah's thin boots were no match for the deep snow and bitter wind. Soon her feet went numb, then began to burn with a pain that made every step agony. Her coat, which had seemed warm enough when they started their journey, now felt as thin as paper against the savage cold. As darkness fell, Sarah realized she was lost. The blowing snow had covered their tracks, and every direction looked the same in the pale moonlight. She stumbled forward, calling out for help, but her voice was swallowed by the endless white silence. Her legs were growing weak, and she knew she couldn't walk much farther. The cold was winning. Sarah's movements became slower and clumsier as her body began to shut down. She fell several times, each time finding it harder to get back up. Her feet had lost all feeling, and she suspected they were badly frostbitten inside her ruined boots. Finally, exhaustion overcame her completely. Sarah collapsed in a small clearing, her body too tired and cold to take another step. Snow began to cover her still form as she lay there, wondering if this was how her story would end. She thought about her family back at the wagon train, probably wondering where she and her father had gone. She thought about little Mary still fighting her fever, and about her mother trying to keep everyone alive. As consciousness began to fade, Sarah heard something that made her heart skip. It was the sound of hoofbeats, muffled but definitely real. Someone was riding through the snow, moving with purpose through the deadly night. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was too weak to carry over the wind. She could only lie there and hope that whoever was coming would find her before it was too late. Through the swirling snow came a figure that seemed almost ghostly in the pale moonlight. The rider sat tall on his horse, moving with confidence despite the treacherous conditions. His long black hair whipped in the wind, and his weathered face showed no fear of the storm that had claimed so many lives. This was Running Wolf, a member of the Jicarilla Apache tribe. He was 32 years old and had spent his entire life learning to survive in harsh mountain winters. While white settlers struggled against the elements, Running Wolf moved through the snow as if it were just another part of his natural world. He had been riding for 2 days, carrying urgent news between Apache camps scattered across the territory. The storm didn't stop him from his mission, though it had certainly made travel more dangerous. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Thunder, was bred for mountain travel and could find footing where other horses would slip and fall. Running Wolf had excellent eyesight, trained from childhood to spot danger and opportunity in the wilderness. Even in the blowing snow, he noticed things that others would miss. That's why he saw the dark shape lying in the clearing ahead, almost completely covered by fresh snow. At first he thought it might be a fallen animal, but as he rode closer, Thunder snorted and shied away, sensing something different. Running Wolf dismounted and walked carefully toward the shape, his moccasins silent on the snow. What he found made him stop short with surprise and concern. It was a young white woman, barely more than a girl, lying motionless in the snow. Her lips were blue and frost covered her eyebrows and hair. Her clothes were soaked through and her boots were so torn that her bare feet were exposed to the deadly cold. She looked more dead than alive. Running Wolf had no love for white settlers. His people had suffered greatly since the wagon trains started crossing their lands. Treaties were broken, sacred places were destroyed, and Apache families had been driven from their homes. Many of his tribe members had died from diseases brought by the whites, and others had been killed in battles over land. But as Running Wolf knelt beside Sarah, all of those grievances seemed distant. Here was simply a human being in desperate need of help. His grandmother had taught him that showing mercy to the helpless was a sacred duty, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Sarah was still breathing, but just barely. Her pulse was weak and her skin was cold as ice. Running Wolf knew she was very close to death from exposure. He had seen this condition before in Apache children who had wandered too far from camp during winter storms. Without immediate warmth, she would be dead within the hour. Running Wolf worked quickly, his experienced hands knowing exactly what to do. First, he brushed the snow away from Sarah's body and checked for injuries. Her feet were severely frostbitten, and she had several cuts and bruises from falling in the snow. But there were no broken bones or serious wounds that would prevent him from moving her. The Apache warrior faced a difficult decision. His own mission was important to his people, and helping this white girl would delay him significantly. Storm clouds were still gathering in the distance, promising more snow before morning. Every minute he spent here increased his own risk of being caught in another blizzard, but Running Wolf's conscience wouldn't let him ride away. He thought of his own sister, who had died young from a white man's disease. He thought of his daughter, who might someday need help from a stranger. The spirits of his ancestors whispered that this was a test of his character. Moving with swift efficiency, Running Wolf lifted Sarah's limp form and carried her to his horse. Thunder stood perfectly still, trained to remain calm in any situation. Running Wolf secured Sarah in front of him on the saddle, wrapping his arms around her to hold her in place. But holding her wasn't enough. Sarah's body temperature was so low that she needed immediate warming or she would die anyway. Running Wolf made another quick decision that went against everything his warrior training had taught him about dealing with enemies. He removed his heavy buffalo hide coat and wrapped it around Sarah's shivering form. Then he took off his wool blanket, the one his grandmother had woven for him before her death, and wrapped that around her as well. The blanket was sacred to him, decorated with symbols of protection and good fortune. Giving it to a white stranger felt like a betrayal of his heritage, yet something deep inside him knew it was the right thing to do. As he wrapped the warm blanket around Sarah's frozen body, he felt a strange sense of peace. His grandmother's spirit seemed to approve of his choice, and the storm itself appeared to calm slightly. With Sarah bundled securely against his chest, Running Wolf urged Thunder forward through the snow. He needed to find shelter quickly, somewhere warm and dry where the girl could recover. His own body was now exposed to the cold, wearing only his buckskin shirt and leggings. The wind cut through the thin material like knives, and he began to shiver violently. But Running Wolf had endured worse conditions during his warrior training. Apache boys learned early how to ignore physical discomfort and focus on survival. He gritted his teeth against the cold and concentrated on guiding Thunder through the treacherous terrain. As they rode through the night, Sarah occasionally stirred in his arms, mumbling words he couldn't understand. Her body gradually grew warmer against his, which gave him hope that she might survive. The buffalo coat and sacred blanket were doing their work, trapping her body heat and slowly bringing her back from the edge of death. Running Wolf began to sing softly, an Apache healing song his grandmother had taught him. The melody was old and powerful, passed down through generations of his people. He didn't know if it would help the white girl, but it couldn't hurt. The ancient words seemed to give him strength as he fought against the storm to save a stranger's life. Behind them, the wind began to erase their tracks, covering all evidence of their passage through the deadly night. Ahead lay uncertainty, but Running Wolf was determined to see this act of mercy through to its end, no matter what it might cost him personally. Running Wolf rode through the night, his body growing numb from cold as he searched for shelter. His sacred blanket and buffalo coat were keeping Sarah alive, but his own thin buckskin clothing offered little protection against the bitter wind. Ice formed in his long black hair, and his fingers were losing feeling despite the leather gloves he wore. Thunder moved carefully through the deep snow, trusting his rider's guidance even when the path seemed impossible. The loyal Mustang had carried Running Wolf through many dangerous situations, and tonight was no different. Horse and rider worked together as they had for 7 years, each understanding the other's signals without need for words. After what seemed like hours, Running Wolf spotted something that filled him with relief. Ahead, barely visible through the blowing snow, was the dark outline of a small cave in the rocky hillside. He had discovered this shelter during a hunting trip 2 summers ago, and remembered that it was deep enough to protect them from the storm. Guiding Thunder to the cave entrance, Running Wolf carefully dismounted while keeping Sarah secure in his arms. She was still unconscious, but her breathing seemed stronger now. The warmth from his coat and blanket was slowly bringing her back from the edge of death. The cave was exactly as he remembered it. About 20 feet deep and 8 feet wide, with a sandy floor and smooth walls carved by centuries of wind and water. Most importantly, it was completely dry and sheltered from the storm raging outside. Running Wolf gently laid Sarah on the cave floor, keeping her wrapped in the warm coverings. Then he led Thunder inside, grateful that the cave was large enough to accommodate both the horse and 2 people. Thunder would provide additional body heat, and Running Wolf wouldn't have to worry about his faithful companion freezing outside. Working quickly in the darkness, Running Wolf gathered dry wood that previous travelers had left in the cave. His numb fingers struggled with his flint and steel, but his persistence paid off. Soon a small fire was crackling near the cave entrance, casting dancing shadows on the walls and filling the space with blessed warmth. The firelight revealed Sarah's face clearly for the first time. Running Wolf could see that she was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 15 or 16 years old. Her blonde hair was matted with snow and ice, and her pale skin showed the blue tint of severe cold exposure. But she was beautiful in the way that young things are beautiful, full of potential and life. As warmth from the fire began to fill the cave, Sarah started to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, and she made small sounds of confusion and pain. Running Wolf knew she would be disoriented when she woke up, possibly frightened to find herself with an Apache warrior in a cave far from civilization. He moved carefully to avoid startling her, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. When Sarah's eyes finally opened, they were wide with fear and confusion. She tried to sit up quickly, but weakness and dizziness forced her back down. "Where am I?" Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. She looked around the cave with growing alarm, taking in the fire, the horse, and most importantly, the tall Apache man sitting across from her. Running Wolf spoke softly in English, which he had learned from trading with white merchants. "You are safe," he said, his accent thick but his words clear. "Storm very bad? You almost die. I bring you to warm place." Sarah's memories came flooding back. The blizzard, her father's collapse, her desperate journey through the snow, and finally falling in the clearing with no hope of rescue. She looked down at herself and realized she was wrapped in a heavy coat and a beautiful blanket that definitely wasn't hers. "You saved me," she said, more as a statement than a question. The evidence was all around her. This Apache warrior had found her dying in the snow and had risked his own life to bring her to safety. Running Wolf nodded once, then turned his attention to checking her condition. "Feet very cold," he said, pointing to where her torn boots barely covered her toes. "Must warm slow or damage worse?" Sarah tried to wiggle her toes and felt sharp pains shooting up her legs. Her feet were completely numb, which scared her more than the pain had. She had heard stories of people losing fingers and toes to frostbite, and she wondered if permanent damage had already been done. Running Wolf seemed to understand her fear. He moved closer, his movements careful and respectful. "I help," he said simply. "Know how fix cold damage. Do many times before." Despite her fear of this stranger, Sarah found herself trusting him. His dark eyes were kind and his voice was gentle. More importantly, he had already proven his good intentions by saving her life when he could have easily ridden past. Running Wolf began to work on Sarah's feet with the skill of someone who had treated frostbite many times before. He removed her ruined boots carefully, wincing at the sight of her blue and swollen toes. Then he began to massage her feet gently, working to restore circulation without causing more damage. The process was painful for Sarah, but she bit her lip and endured it. She watched Running Wolf's face as he worked, noting the concentration and care he put into helping her. His hands were strong but gentle, and he stopped whenever she showed signs of too much pain. "Why did you help me?" Sarah asked as he worked. I thought Apache and white people were enemies." Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, continuing to massage her feet. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of deep thought. "Grandmother teach me that spirits watch how we treat helpless ones. You not enemy when you dying in snow, you just person who need help." As the night progressed, Running Wolf shared his meager supplies with Sarah. He had dried meat, some cornmeal, and a small pouch of medicinal herbs that he brewed into a warming tea. Sarah ate gratefully, feeling strength slowly returning to her body. Outside the cave, the storm continued to rage, but inside their small sanctuary, warmth and safety prevailed. Thunder stood quietly in the back of the cave, occasionally snorting softly as if to remind them he was there. The fire crackled steadily, fed by Running Wolf's careful attention. Sarah began to tell Running Wolf about her family and their desperate situation. She explained about the wagon train, her sick sister, and her father's sacrifice in the snow. Tears ran down her cheeks as she described Thomas's final words and her own terrible journey through the blizzard. Running Wolf listened without judgment, occasionally nodding to show he understood. When Sarah finished her story, he was quiet for several minutes, staring into the fire. Finally, he looked up at her with determination in his dark eyes. "When storm end," he said, "we find your people." When Sarah woke the next morning, the cave was filled with soft golden light from the fire. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind an eerie silence that felt almost unnatural after the howling wind of the previous night. Running Wolf was already awake, sitting cross-legged near the cave entrance watching the world outside. "Storm finished," he said when he noticed Sarah stirring. "Sun coming up. Good day for travel." He had spent much of the night keeping watch, feeding the fire, and checking on Sarah's condition. Her color was much better now, and her breathing was strong and regular. Sarah sat up carefully, testing her body's response. She felt weak and sore, but alive. Her feet still hurt, but the terrible numbness was gone. When she wiggled her toes, sharp pains shot through them, which Running Wolf had told her was actually a good sign that circulation was returning. "How long was I unconscious in the snow?" she asked, accepting a cup of the herbal tea Running Wolf offered her. "Maybe 1 hour when I find you. Maybe less. You very lucky. Few minutes more and warmth not bring you back." Running Wolf's English was improving as he spoke more, though his accent remained thick and his grammar sometimes uncertain. As morning light grew stronger, Sarah got her first clear look at the man who had saved her life. Running Wolf was tall and lean, with the kind of muscular build that came from a lifetime of physical activity. His long black hair was braided with leather strips and small beads. His face was weathered by years of outdoor living, but his dark eyes held intelligence and kindness. His clothing was practical and well-made. Buckskin shirt and leggings decorated with simple but beautiful beadwork. Moccasins that were designed for silent movement and sure footing. A belt that held a knife. A small pouch of supplies and other tools needed for survival in the wilderness. Sarah realized she was still wrapped in his buffalo coat and sacred blanket. "You must be cold," she said, starting to remove the heavy coat. "You should take this back." Running Wolf held up his hand to stop her. "You keep until strong. Cold still dangerous for you. I used to mount in winter. You not." They shared another meal of dried meat and corn cakes while discussing their next move. Running Wolf had been thinking about Sarah's story throughout the night. Finding her family's wagon train in all this snow would be difficult, but he had ideas about where to look. "Wagon people, they go where?" he asked. "What direction when storms start?" Sarah tried to remember the details from that terrible day. "We were heading west toward Denver. My father said we would follow the South Platte River Valley. When the storm hit, we stopped near some pine trees for shelter." Running Wolf nodded thoughtfully. He knew the area well and could think of several places where wagon trains might seek shelter. The problem was that the storm had been so severe that the travelers might have been forced to move from their original location. "We look for smoke first," he decided. "People make fires to stay warm. Smoke easy to see in clear air after storm." Before they could leave, Running Wolf wanted to make sure Sarah was strong enough for travel. He checked her feet again, pleased to see that the color was much better. The frostbite damage appeared to be minor, though she would need to be careful for several more days. "Can walk short distance," he said, "but ride horse better. Thunderstrong, carry both." Sarah felt nervous about riding double with Running Wolf, but she knew she didn't have much choice. Her own boots were ruined, and walking through deep snow would be impossible in her condition. She would have to trust this Apache warrior who had already saved her life once. As they prepared to leave the cave, Sarah realized how much Running Wolf had sacrificed to help her. He had delayed his own important mission, used up his supplies, and given her his warmest clothing. She wondered what his own people would think about him helping a white settler. "Won't you get in trouble for this?" she asked. "I mean, for helping me instead of—" She wasn't sure how to finish the question without sounding insulting. Running Wolf understood what she was trying to ask. "Apache people not all same," he said slowly. "Some hate all whites. Some want peace. I think each person different. Judge by what they do, not what they look like." He helped Sarah onto Thunder's back, then swung up behind her. The horse was strong enough to carry them both easily, and Running Wolf was an experienced rider who could guide Thunder through the treacherous snow-covered terrain. As they rode out of the cave into the bright morning sunlight, Sarah was amazed by the transformed landscape. The storm had deposited several feet of fresh snow, turning familiar landmarks into strange white sculptures. Everything sparkled like diamonds in the clear mountain air, but the beauty also highlighted how dangerous their situation remained. This vast white wilderness could hide her family's wagon train completely. Even if they were alive, finding them in all this snow would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Running Wolf seemed to read her thoughts. "Not worry," he said softly. "Apache know how track in snow. We find your people." They rode for several hours, following what Running Wolf believed were old trail routes buried under the snow. He stopped frequently to study the landscape, looking for signs that most people would never notice. A slightly different snow pattern here, a barely visible tree marking there, subtle clues that helped him navigate through the wilderness. Around midday, Running Wolf suddenly pulled Thunder to a stop. "Look," he said, pointing toward a distant ridge. "Smoke." Sarah strained her eyes and finally saw what he had spotted. A thin column of gray smoke was rising from beyond a hill about 2 miles away. It was so faint that she would never have noticed it on her own, but to Running Wolf's trained eyes it stood out clearly against the blue sky. Could it be them? Sarah asked, her heart beginning to race with hope and fear. "We see," Running Wolf replied, urging Thunder toward the smoke. "But stay quiet when we get close. Not know who make fire. Could be your people. Could be others." As they rode closer to the source of the smoke, Sarah's emotions were in turmoil. Part of her desperately hoped they had found her family's wagon train, but another part feared what they might discover. Had her little sister Mary survived the fever? Was her mother still alive? And what about the other families who had been traveling with them? Running Wolf sensed her anxiety and spoke softly to reassure her. "Strong heart," he said. "Whatever we find, we face together. You not alone now." His words gave Sarah courage as they approached what might be a reunion with her family or a confrontation with strangers. Either way, she knew that this Apache warrior would stand beside her, just as he had through the worst night of her life. As they crested the hill, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Below them, scattered among a grove of pine trees, were the familiar shapes of covered wagons. Smoke was rising from several small fires and people were moving around the camp. It was definitely her family's wagon train. That's them, Sarah cried out, her voice breaking with emotion. Those are my people. But Running Wolf held up his hand for caution. Wait, he said quietly. Let me go first. White people sometimes shoot first, ask questions after, especially when see Apache. Sarah realized he was right. The settlers would be suspicious of any stranger approaching their camp, and an Apache warrior would be seen as a potential threat. She watched anxiously as Running Wolf guided Thunder slowly down the hill, his posture non-threatening but alert. People in the camp noticed them coming. Men reached for their rifles and women gathered children close. A group of armed settlers formed a defensive line, their weapons pointed toward the approaching riders. That's far enough, shouted a bearded man Sarah recognized as Wagon Master Jim Crawford. State your business, Indian. Running Wolf stopped Thunder about 50 yards from the camp. I bring your lost one, he called out in his careful English. Girl from your people. Found in snow. There was confused murmuring from the settlers. They were trying to see who was riding behind the Apache warrior, but Sarah was still wrapped in the buffalo coat and sacred blanket, making her difficult to recognize from a distance. Sarah knew she had to act. Despite Running Wolf's concern for their safety, she had to let her people know who she was. Mother, she called out as loudly as she could. Mother, it's Sarah. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Elizabeth Mitchell pushed through the line of armed men, her face transformed by hope and disbelief. Sarah, is that really you? It's me, Mother. Sarah slipped down from Thunder's back, stumbling slightly as her still tender feet hit the ground. She ran toward her mother as fast as her weakened condition would allow. The reunion was overwhelming. Mother and daughter crashed together in a fierce embrace, both sobbing with relief and joy. Elizabeth held Sarah so tightly it almost hurt, as if she was afraid her daughter might disappear again if she let go. We thought you were dead, Elizabeth whispered through her tears. When you and your father didn't come back, we thought the storm had taken you both. Oh, Sarah, my precious girl. The other settlers gradually lowered their weapons, though they kept watching Running Wolf with suspicion and uncertainty. An Apache warrior returning their lost daughter was not something any of them had expected to see. Sarah looked around the camp anxiously. How is Mary? Is she all right? Elizabeth's face grew sad. She's alive, but still very sick. The fever broke yesterday, but she's so weak. We've done everything we can, but... She didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. Her little sister was still in danger. And father? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer from her mother's expression. He didn't come back with you, Elizabeth said softly. It wasn't a question. She had already accepted the truth that Sarah's presence confirmed. Sarah nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. He collapsed in the snow. He told me to come back to you. He saved my life by sending me away, but I couldn't save his. Jim Crawford approached cautiously, his rifle still in his hands but no longer pointed at Running Wolf. Girl, what happened out there? How did you end up with this Apache? Sarah straightened up, wiping her tears. She looked back at Running Wolf, who sat quietly on his horse, waiting to see how the situation would develop. He saved my life, she said clearly, her voice carrying to everyone in the camp. I was dying in the snow and he found me. He gave me his coat and blanket to keep me warm. He spent the whole night taking care of me in a cave. The settlers exchanged glances, clearly struggling to process this information. Their experience with Apache had mostly involved conflict and mutual distrust. The idea of an Apache warrior risking his own safety to help a white settler challenged everything they believed. Why would he do that? Asked Martha Stevens, one of the other mothers in the group. Sarah looked at Running Wolf again, remembering his words from the night before. He said his grandmother taught him that the spirits watch how we treat helpless people. He said I wasn't an enemy when I was dying in the snow, just a person who needed help. Running Wolf had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke. Girl's safe with her people now, he said. I go continue my journey. Wait, Sarah called out as he started to turn Thunder away. She ran back to him, still wrapped in his precious buffalo coat and sacred blanket. I have to give these back to you. But Running Wolf shook his head. You keep coat. Still cold and you need warmth. Blanket. He paused, looking at the sacred blanket his grandmother had made. blanket you keep also. Grandmother would want this. She say blanket bring protection to whoever need it most. Sarah was overwhelmed by his generosity. But it's sacred to you. I can't take something so important. Sometimes spirits choose who gets sacred things, Running Wolf replied. I think grandmother's spirit choose you. He looked around at all the settlers watching them. Maybe this how peace begins. One person help another. Show that Apache and white people can be friends, not always enemies. Jim Crawford stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. Apache, you saved one of our own. That means something. He extended his hand in the universal gesture of friendship and respect. Running Wolf looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached down and clasped it firmly. My name Running Wolf, he said. Maybe we meet again in better times. Maybe we will, Crawford replied. You'll always be welcome in our camp. As Running Wolf prepared to leave, Sarah felt a deep sadness. This man had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. More than that, he had shown her that people were more complex than the stories and prejudices she had grown up with. Will I ever see you again? She asked. Running Wolf smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. World very small place. Paths cross when spirits want them to cross. He urged Thunder forward, but then stopped and looked back one more time. Take care of sick sister, he said. Use blanket to keep her warm. Grandmother's medicine still strong in the weaving. With that, he rode away, his figure gradually disappearing into the white landscape. Sarah stood watching until he was completely out of sight, clutching the sacred blanket that might help save her sister's life. The settlers around her were quiet, processing what they had witnessed. Many of them had never imagined they would see such kindness from an Apache warrior. Some were already rethinking their assumptions about the native people they shared this land with. Sarah turned back to her mother, ready to focus on helping Mary recover, but she would never forget the Apache warrior who had wrapped her in his blanket and showed her that humanity could transcend the boundaries of race and culture. Sarah rushed to the wagon where her family was staying, her heart pounding with anxiety about Mary's condition. Inside the cramped space, her two younger sisters, Anne and Mary, were huddled together under thin blankets. Anne, who was 7, looked up with wide eyes when Sarah entered. Sarah, you came back. Anne threw herself into her sister's arms, crying with relief. Mary's been so sick and Mama said you and Papa went to find help. But then you didn't come back and we thought maybe the snow got you too. Sarah held Anne close, then turned her attention to Mary. Her 4-year-old sister lay still and pale, her breathing shallow and labored. Elizabeth sat beside her, gently bathing Mary's forehead with a damp cloth. She's been like this since yesterday, Elizabeth whispered. The fever finally broke, but she's so weak. She won't eat anything, and she barely responds when we talk to her. Sarah unwrapped Running Wolf's sacred blanket from around her shoulders. Even though she was still cold, Mary needed its warmth more than she did. As she spread the beautiful woven blanket over her little sister, something remarkable happened. The blanket seemed to radiate a gentle warmth that went beyond simple wool and weaving. Mary's breathing became deeper and more regular almost immediately. Her pale cheeks gained a hint of color, and for the first time in days she stirred restlessly instead of lying perfectly still. What is that blanket? Elizabeth asked in wonder. It feels different somehow. Sarah explained what Running Wolf had told her about his grandmother's weaving and the protective medicine woven into the fabric. He said his grandmother's spirit would want whoever needed it most to have it. He believed Mary could be helped by it. As if responding to their conversation, Mary's eyes fluttered open. They were still glassy with illness, but they focused on Sarah with recognition and love. Sarah? She whispered weakly. You came back. I'm here, little one, Sarah said, tears of joy streaming down her face. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few hours, Mary's improvement was dramatic. She was able to drink some broth that Elizabeth heated over their small fire. Her color continued to improve, and she began to respond more normally to her family's voices. By evening, she was sitting up and asking for food. Word of Mary's recovery spread quickly through the camp. People who had been preparing for the worst were amazed by the sudden change in the child's condition. Many attributed it to the mysterious Apache blanket, though others insisted it was simply the natural course of her illness. Dr. William Hayes, a physician traveling with another family, examined Mary thoroughly. I can't explain it medically, he admitted to Elizabeth. Yesterday I would have said she had little chance of recovery. Today, she's responding like a child who was never seriously ill. It's extraordinary. Sarah spent the evening telling her family about her adventure with Running Wolf. She described the cave, the warmth of his fire, and the gentle way he had treated her frostbitten feet. She explained how he had given up his own comfort to keep her alive. He could have ridden past me in the snow, she said. His own people were depending on him to deliver a message. But he stopped and risked everything to save a stranger. Elizabeth listened to every word, her expression growing more thoughtful as the story continued. Your father always said that you could judge a man's character by how he treats those who can't help him in return, she said finally. This Apache warrior sounds like a man of great character. The other families in the wagon train had mixed reactions to Sarah's story. Some were genuinely moved by Running Wolf's kindness and began to reconsider their assumptions about Apache people. Others remained suspicious, wondering if there was some hidden motive behind his actions. Jim Crawford organized a meeting that evening to discuss what had happened and what it might mean for their future relations with the local tribes. That Apache could have demanded payment for returning the girl, he pointed out. He could have taken her as a captive. Instead, he asked for nothing and gave her valuable items to keep. Maybe they're not all the monsters we've been told they are, suggested Martha Stevens. Maybe some of them are just people trying to survive, same as us. But others disagreed. One good Indian doesn't mean they're all trustworthy, argued Henry Walsh, a man who had lost friends in Apache raids. This could be some kind of trick to make us let our guard down. Sarah listened to the debate with growing frustration. These people were talking about Running Wolf as if he were some kind of puzzle to be solved, rather than a human being who had shown extraordinary kindness. She finally stood up to address the group. I looked into his eyes, she said firmly. I saw his face when he was taking care of me. There was no trick, no hidden plan. He was just a good man doing what he thought was right. If we can't see that, then maybe we're the ones with the problem. Her words created an uncomfortable silence. Many of the settlers had never heard such a defense of an Apache from one of their own people. Sarah's mother reached over and squeezed her hand, showing support for her daughter's courage. Dr. Hayes spoke up. The girl has a point. We judge people by their actions, and this Apache's actions were those of a healer and protector. Perhaps we should consider what this means for our relationships with the native people we encounter. As the meeting broke up, Sarah returned to her family's wagon where Mary was sleeping peacefully under Running Wolf's sacred blanket. The child's breathing was strong and regular, and her fever had not returned. Whatever medicine the Apache grandmother had woven into that blanket was working better than any white man's remedy. Elizabeth sat beside her daughters, watching Mary sleep. Your father would be proud of you, she told Sarah quietly. You've grown up so much in just a few days. You've learned something important about people and kindness that many adults never figure out. Sarah pulled the buffalo coat tighter around her shoulders, thinking about Running Wolf somewhere out in the cold night. He was probably sleeping under the stars with only his buckskin clothing for warmth, having given away his best protection to save a stranger's life. I hope he stays warm, she whispered to the night wind. I hope the spirits protect him the way he protected me. As if in answer to her prayer, the wind calmed and the stars seemed to shine brighter. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called softly, and Sarah chose to believe it was a good omen. The sacred blanket had brought healing to her family, but more importantly, Running Wolf's act of compassion had planted seeds of understanding that might someday grow into lasting peace between their peoples. The next morning would bring new challenges as the wagon train prepared to continue their journey west. But tonight, there was hope where there had been despair and healing where there had been sickness. Sometimes Sarah realized the most powerful medicine of all was simple human kindness. 3 weeks later, the wagon train rolled into Denver territory, their journey finally complete despite the hardships they had endured. Mary had made a full recovery and was running around the camp as energetically as any healthy 4-year-old. The sacred Apache blanket had never left her side during the remainder of their travels. Sarah had grown stronger too, though she still wore Running Wolf's buffalo coat during the cold mountain mornings. Her frostbitten feet had healed completely, leaving only faint scars as reminders of that terrible night in the snow. But the deeper changes in her heart and mind would last much longer than any physical marks. The Mitchell family had claimed their plot of land near the South Platte River, where they planned to build a farm and start their new life. Elizabeth was managing the practical details with determination, though the loss of Thomas weighed heavily on all of them. Sarah had become her mother's primary helper, taking on responsibilities that would have seemed impossible just a month earlier. As they set up their temporary camp, Sarah often found herself scanning the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar rider on a Mustang named Thunder. She wondered if Running Wolf had successfully completed his mission to the other Apache camps. She wondered if he ever thought about the night he had saved a stranger's life. One evening, as Sarah was helping her mother prepare dinner, a rider approached their camp. Sarah's heart leaped when she saw the familiar silhouette against the sunset, but as the figure came closer, she realized it wasn't Running Wolf. This was a different Apache man, older and wearing the clothes of someone who worked with white traders. The man introduced himself as Joseph Standing Bear, and he spoke excellent English. "I bring message," he said to Sarah after Elizabeth had nervously agreed to let him approach. "From Running Wolf of the Jicarilla Band." Sarah's pulse quickened. "You know Running Wolf? Is he all right?" Joseph smiled. "He is well. He told me about girl he found in snow, girl with courage and kind heart. He asked me to bring you something when I come to trade in Denver." From his saddlebag, Joseph withdrew a small leather pouch decorated with the same beadwork pattern that had been on Running Wolf's clothing. "He made this for you," Joseph explained. "Inside are herbs for healing and protection, Apache medicine that his grandmother taught him to prepare." Sarah accepted the gift with trembling hands. The leather was soft and expertly crafted, and the beadwork was beautiful in its simplicity. Inside the pouch, she could smell the earthy fragrance of dried plants and roots. "Please tell him thank you," Sarah said. "Tell him that his blanket saved my sister's life and that our family will never forget his kindness." Joseph nodded. "He already knows your sister as well. Apache have ways of learning things that happen in the territory. He is glad the medicine blanket helped her." Before Joseph left, he had one more message to deliver. "Running Wolf says to tell you that paths cross when spirits want them to cross. He thinks your paths will cross again someday." That prediction came true sooner than anyone expected. 2 months later, as the Mitchell family was working to establish their farm, trouble came to the Denver area. A group of aggressive white settlers had been attacking peaceful Apache camps, stealing horses and burning lodges. The situation was growing dangerous with both sides talking about war. Sarah was in town buying supplies when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. A group of men were planning to raid an Apache camp that very night, claiming they needed to strike before the savages organized a major attack. "There's a band camping up near Willow Creek," one of the men was saying. "Mostly women and children from what I hear. Should be easy pickings." Sarah knew she had to act. These men were planning to attack innocent people, possibly including families with children, no older than Mary. She thought about Running Wolf's kindness and knew she couldn't let hatred and fear destroy lives when understanding was possible. She raced home and told her mother what she had heard. Elizabeth was horrified but also frightened. "Sarah, what can we do? We're just one family and we can't fight armed men." "We can warn them," Sarah said firmly. "If we ride out tonight, we might be able to reach the Apache camp before the raiders do." It was a dangerous plan, but Elizabeth recognized the determination in her daughter's voice. This was the same courage that had carried Sarah through the blizzard to find help for her family. "Your father always said we should do what's right even when it's difficult," she said finally. "But I'm coming with you." They borrowed horses from a neighbor and rode through the night toward Willow Creek. Sarah carried Running Wolf's sacred blanket as a sign that they came in peace. As they approached the Apache camp, they called out in English, hoping someone would understand their warning. To their amazement, Running Wolf himself emerged from one of the lodges. His face showed surprise and concern when he saw Sarah and Elizabeth riding toward them in the darkness. "Sarah, why you here? What brings you to our camp at night?" Sarah quickly explained about the planned raid. Running Wolf's expression grew grim as he listened, but he also showed gratitude for their warning. "You risk much to help my people," he said. "White men would not understand why you warn Apache of attack." "Some white men are good and some are bad," Sarah replied, echoing his own words from that night in the cave. "Just like some Apache are good and some are bad. We judge people by what they do, not by what they look like." Running Wolf organized his people quickly and efficiently. They broke camp and moved to a more defensible position in the nearby hills before the raiders arrived. The attackers found nothing but empty lodges and cold fire pits. and they eventually gave up and returned to town empty-handed. Later, Sarah and Running Wolf stood together on a hilltop, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The danger had passed and both their peoples were safe for now. "You have grown wise since our night in the cave," Running Wolf said. "You understand that peace is not something that happens by itself. Must be built by people who choose to see past fear and hatred." Sarah nodded, fingering the medicine pouch he had made for her. "Maybe someday there will be more people like you on both sides. People who choose kindness over conflict," Running Wolf smiled. "Change comes slow like spring after long winter, but it comes. Your courage tonight shows that seeds of understanding are already growing." As they prepared to part ways again, Sarah realized that their friendship had become something larger than just two people from different cultures. They had become symbols of what was possible when human beings chose compassion over prejudice, understanding over fear. The sacred blanket that had once wrapped a dying girl in the snow now represented hope for a future where Apache and white settlers might live in peace. And the Apache warrior who had risked everything to save a stranger had proven that the greatest strength often comes from showing mercy to those who need it most. Years later, when Sarah was grown and had children of her own, she would tell them the story of the night an Apache rider found her barefoot and freezing in the snow. She would show them the sacred blanket and the medicine pouch, and she would teach them that the color of a person's skin matters far less than the kindness in their heart. Running Wolf's lesson had taken root and grown, spreading through Sarah's family and community like seeds carried on a warm wind. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single act of unexpected mercy, given freely by someone who asks for nothing in return except the chance to do what is right.